Sir, you need to leave now." Those 6 words dropped into the middle of the joyous graduation ceremony like a bomb. The audience, just moments ago buzzing with laughter and pride, went silent. All eyes turned to the tall, broad-shouldered black man in the 4th row, his posture straight, his chest filled with pride, his marine dress uniform gleaming. His name was Sergeant Marcus Carter, and his only crime that day was being there. .2 guards stood over him. One with his hand resting on his belt, the other already leaning in to usher him away. Neither asked who he was. Neither cared, but Marcus didn't move. He didn't flinch. He simply stared forward, jaw tight, lips pressed together. He could see his son, Jason, just a few feet away, standing tall in his navy dress blues, blinking rapidly, his expression a mix of shock and helplessness. The audience murmured. Whispers broke out like wildfire across the rows. Why are they asking him to leave? Isn't that his dad? Wait, isn't he military too? But before the guards could lay a hand on Marcus, a slow shift happened at the back of the room. 4 men stood up, all at once, silent and statuesque. Their posture, their bearing, unmistakable. Navy SEALs, their presence didn't need words. But one of them spoke, calm but powerful. "You might want to think twice." The guards froze. The air thickened. This was no ordinary moment, and in that frozen silence, the battle lines were drawn, not with weapons, but with dignity, honor, and the quiet force of men who don't let their own stand alone. Sergeant Marcus Carter had worn the uniform for 20 years. 2 decades of blood, sweat, and sacrifice. He had served in Fallujah, had led rescue ops in Afghanistan, and bore scars, both visible and invisible, for a nation he never hesitated to defend. He wasn't there to make a statement, he wasn't seeking recognition, he had come quietly, arriving an hour early just to make sure he didn't miss a second of his son's moment. Jason, his only child, the boy he used to rock to sleep between deployments, was about to graduate from naval officer training, a dream Marcus had worked 2 jobs to support. That he sat in the 4th row, alone but proud, the medal on his chest gleaming under the soft light. Some attendees shifted uncomfortably beside him, as if unsure whether he belonged. He was used to it. A black man in full military decorum often got double takes, but he had learned to ignore them. What he didn't expect was to be challenged by security. They hadn't asked for his name. They hadn't checked his ID. Just assumptions, dangerous, tired assumptions. The younger guard leaned down, voice low but sharp. "This event is restricted to invited guests only." Marcus turned slowly, his voice even. "My name is on that list." The second guard scoffed, not even bothering to look. "Step outside or we'll remove you." Jason saw it all unfold. From the stage, his heart pounded as the 2 guards flanked the man who had raised him. The man who taught him about honor, sacrifice, and strength. And that's when the SEALs moved. Silently stepping closer, because in the military, family doesn't mean blood, it means loyalty. The younger guard reached out, his hand just inches from Marcus's shoulder. That he never made contact, because Marcus, calm as stone, finally turned his head, just slightly, and said in a voice that stopped the air cold, "Touch me, and you'll regret it." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't threaten. But the steel in his tone? It was the sound of a man who had stared down gunfire, who had watched brothers fall beside him, who had lived through the kind of moments these guards would only see in movies. His voice didn't tremble. It cut. The audience gasped. People leaned forward. Someone fumbled for their phone to start recording, but it was the silence that followed that shifted the energy in the room. The 4 SEALs at the back took another step forward. Not fast. Not loud. But deliberate. Controlled. Deadly. Their expressions were unreadable, but their eyes locked onto the guards, and it was clear, they weren't about to let this happen. Then one of them spoke, the tallest of the 4, broad-shouldered, voice low but commanding. "That man has more combat hours than this entire room combined." A pause. "You really want to do this?" The guards hesitated. One of them reached for his radio, voice suddenly unsure. requesting supervisor to row 4. "We've got a situation." Jason stepped off the platform, heart racing, eyes fierce. "He's my father." That hit harder than any punch. Because suddenly, this wasn't about a security protocol. This was about respect. Identity. Recognition, and as whispers spread like wildfire through the hall, everyone began to realize, this wasn't just a Marine, this was a father, a warrior, and a symbol. The words, "He's my father," echoed across the room like a thunderclap. Jason stood tall at the edge of the stage, fists clenched at his sides, eyes locked on the guards. The audience turned to him in surprise. A Navy graduate, one of the day's honorees, was defending the very man being told to leave. The guards looked uncertain now. Their stance shifted, posture no longer firm. One of them mumbled into his radio again, "We've got a problem. He's the father of a graduate." Over. But the 4 Navy SEALs weren't waiting for backup, they stepped fully into the aisle now. All 4 wore civilian clothes, but their presence commanded attention. Each one had a different build, tall, lean, broad, but they moved with the same purpose. They didn't yell. They didn't grandstand. They just stood with Marcus, and that alone was enough. One of the SEALs, an older man with deep scars on his hands and a calm fury in his voice, spoke clearly, "We served with him in Helmand. You're not touching him." That name, Helmand Province, was a lightning rod. Veterans in the crowd stirred. Heads turned. Murmurs rose, then came a booming voice from the back of the auditorium, "That better not be what I think it is." The crowd parted like the Red Sea as the base commander entered, walking swiftly down the aisle, face tight with anger. The guards stood straighter. One stammered, "Sir, we thought he was." The commander held up his hand. "Stop talking." He reached Marcus, then turned to the crowd. "Sergeant Marcus Carter is a decorated Marine with more valor in his shadow than most of us will see in a lifetime." Then, turning back to Marcus, he extended a hand, "Sir, on behalf of this base, I apologize. Your seat is front row." Marcus looked down at the commander's outstretched hand, but he didn't take it. Not out of disrespect, but because the moment had already carved its scar. The humiliation, the assumption that he didn't belong, had already landed. And no handshake could erase the sting of being treated like a trespasser at his own son's achievement. The crowd watched, breathless. The commander stood frozen, his hand still extended. The guards had retreated a few steps, red-faced and silent. Jason moved toward his father, the claps of his shoes echoing loudly in the quiet hall. When he reached him, he didn't speak. He simply turned, stood beside Marcus, and then, in front of hundreds of witnesses, saluted his father first. The silence in the auditorium turned deafening, because that wasn't procedure. It wasn't on the schedule. It wasn't protocol, but it was right. One by one, other Navy graduates on the stage began to rise. Some of them had trained under Jason. Some had heard the stories about Sergeant Carter. And now, seeing the man in person, seeing how he stood tall in the face of public disrespect, they knew what kind of strength real leadership looked like. Another salute. Then another. A ripple of honor spreading across the stage. The SEALs didn't move. They didn't need to. Their mission was already complete. The commander finally lowered his hand, understanding dawning in his eyes. This wasn't about following the rulebook. This was about restoring dignity. "Sergeant Carter," he said more softly, "we'll restart the ceremony. And I want you front and center, where you belong." Marcus nodded once. Still proud, still silent, but this time, not alone, and this time, the applause started with the SEALs. As Marcus took his seat in the front row, the entire auditorium adjusted itself, not just physically, but emotionally. The air felt different now. He didn't walk to the front like a man given permission. He walked like a Marine who had earned it. Jason returned to the stage, eyes misty but burning with pride. Behind him, the other graduates watched silently, some still standing, unsure if they should continue the ceremony or wait for more instructions. The commander stepped up to the podium. His voice, now steadier, addressed not just the room, but the weight of the moment. Before we begin, let us remember, this ceremony honors not just our graduates, but those who shaped them. The fathers, mothers, mentors, and yes, warriors who carried them here. He looked directly at Marcus. We don't just salute uniforms. We salute what they represent. A murmur of agreement flowed through the crowd. What many didn't know was the story behind Marcus's quiet strength. He had enlisted at 19, raised Jason while deployed overseas, and sent money home even when he barely had enough to eat himself. He missed his own promotion ceremony to attend Jason's first spelling bee over a grainy Skype call. He had sacrificed everything, not for medals, not for parades, but for moments like this, and yet, despite the decades of service, all it took was one moment, one assumption for him to almost be erased. Now, he sat upright, chest out, eyes forward. But something had changed. He wasn't just a proud father anymore. He was a reminder that real strength doesn't need to shout. It only needs to stand its ground, and when necessary, let others stand beside it. The ceremony resumed. But no one would forget what came before, because some lessons don't come from textbooks, they come from witnessing dignity in the face of disrespect. As the ceremony resumed, the names of graduates were called one by one. Cheers echoed across the auditorium. Parents clapped. Phones recorded. But even amid the celebration, the crowd kept stealing glances at Marcus Carter. He sat still, hands folded, spine straight, eyes on his son. But inside, his heart was racing. Not from fear. Not from anger. But from something deeper. A conflict that he had spent a lifetime proving himself to a country that seemed to forget him the moment he stepped out of uniform. And now, when all he wanted was to quietly witness his son's achievement, he was nearly pushed out of the picture. Jason's name was finally called. Applause roared. He walked across the stage, accepted his diploma, and shook the commander's hand. But instead of walking off, Jason paused at the microphone. The crowd quieted. Before I say anything else, he began, I want to talk about the man in the front row. He looked directly at Marcus. That's Sergeant Marcus Carter. My father. My hero. A ripple moved through the audience. I've worn this uniform with pride. But I wouldn't be standing here without the man who taught me what it truly means to serve not just your country, but your family, your principles, and yourself. Marcus didn't move. But his jaw tightened again, not from tension this time, but from emotion. You taught me to fight for what's right, even when the world tells you to sit down. And today, I watched you do it again. The audience was silent. Some blinked away tears. So if anyone asks who shaped me into a sailor, tell them it was the Marine who wouldn't leave. The room erupted, not with claps, but with standing applause. The applause thundered through the hall, but Marcus remained seated, humbled, overwhelmed, and quietly moved. Beside him, veterans and strangers alike stood clapping, some even saluting. The 4 Navy SEALs stood motionless at the back, not seeking attention. But people began to notice them again. One by one, they too were applauded, because it wasn't just what they said earlier, it was that they said it without being asked. They had stood up not because protocol demanded it, but because loyalty did. They had recognized one of their own, not by his skin color or civilian status, but by his integrity. After the ceremony, as people flooded out of the hall, whispers followed Marcus like a shadow, only this time, they weren't filled with suspicion. They were full of respect. Jason walked down from the stage and wrapped his arms around his father in a hug that seemed to stretch back 20 years. Neither said a word at first. They didn't have to. Then Marcus finally broke the silence. You did it, son. Jason smiled, eyes glistening. We did it, Dad. Behind them, the SEALs approached. No ranks. No orders. Just brothers. The tallest one, the same man who had spoken earlier, extended a firm hand to Marcus. You remember Helmand, don't you? Marcus grinned faintly. Hard to forget. The SEAL chuckled. You saved my life out there. Today, we just returned the favor. Marcus nodded, gripping his hand. It wasn't a favor, he said quietly. It was honor. They stood there for a moment, warriors who had once shared mud, blood, and silence now sharing something just as sacred, mutual respect, and in that small moment, away from the cameras and chaos, Marcus finally felt something rare, belonging. Outside the graduation hall the sun was beginning to set, casting a golden hue across the base. Families posed for photos, graduates tossed their caps, and laughter echoed through the courtyard. But at the center of it all, something deeper was unfolding. Marcus stood with Jason, the SEALs still nearby. The guards who had tried to remove him were nowhere to be seen. Word had spread fast, too fast for damage control. What happened inside wasn't just a confrontation, it was a statement. People approached Marcus now, not to question him, but to thank him. "Sir, I'm sorry for what happened," a young ensign said. "You showed us what strength really looks like," another graduate added, each word chipped away at the bitterness Marcus had swallowed for years, that he wasn't just being seen, that he was being recognized. The base commander approached once more, this time with the commanding admiral. They both removed their hats and stood before Marcus like men acknowledging an equal. "Sergeant Carter," the admiral said, "you gave more to this country than most will ever understand. And today, you gave even more, an example." Jason looked on, pride radiating from his face. This wasn't just his day anymore. It was their legacy. "That we're issuing a formal apology," the commander added. "But more than that, we're updating our internal policy. No parent, especially one in uniform, should ever be asked to leave a military ceremony without cause. Your experience is now a lesson." Marcus gave a short nod, not for himself but for every service member who might follow him, because in that moment, respect wasn't given, it was earned, then amplified. The SEALs didn't say much, they didn't need to, their silence spoke volumes. "We protect our own. Always." The crowd began to thin as families left the courtyard, but Marcus remained, standing beside his son beneath the setting sun. The sky was painted in deep blues and fiery golds, almost poetic, as if even the heavens were closing the day with honor. Jason held his diploma in one hand, the other still on his father's shoulder. "You think they'll remember this?" he asked. Marcus gave a quiet smile. "They won't forget it. Because this wasn't just about two guards making a mistake. This was about how a single man's quiet strength corrected an entire system's blind spot. About how even after decades of service, a black Marine still had to prove he belonged, and how the world finally saw him for what he truly was, a symbol of sacrifice, loyalty and unshakable pride." The SEALs approached one last time, each giving Marcus a firm nod. "Your story's gonna echo," one said. "In every room where someone doubts if they're welcome," added another. Jason glanced at the diploma again, then did something no one expected. He stepped forward, turned to the small crowd still lingering, and raised his voice. "This honor doesn't belong to just me. It belongs to my father. And every service member like him, those who serve quietly, endure silently, and stand tall when the world tries to shrink them." He turned and faced Marcus. "Dad, I'll make sure your name means something long after this day." Tears welled in Marcus's eyes, not from pain, but from recognition. The final image was burned into every heart there, a Marine, a father, a hero, no longer in the shadows, but standing front and center where he had always belonged. Some uniforms fade, but respect, that's forever, and on that day the world learned you don't mess with a Marine's family. Not then. Not now. Not ever.